Ambassador Hyun walked into the Great Council chamber for the first time. The room was huge, with tall ceilings that seemed to reach into space itself. Beings from across the galaxy sat in their assigned seats, each one different from the next. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like living crystals that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. Hyun felt nervous. His home planet had just joined the Galactic Council after years of trying to prove they were ready. He had studied for months to prepare for this moment. He knew the rules, the customs, and the history of every major species in the galaxy. At least, he thought he did. The meeting started like all the others he had read about. Trade agreements were discussed, border disputes were settled. New exploration zones were mapped out for different species to claim. Everything seemed normal until they brought out the navigation charts. The holographic display filled the center of the room. Thousands of star systems glowed in soft blue light. Trade routes appeared as green lines connecting one world to another. Military zones showed up in red. Protected areas for endangered species were marked in purple. It was beautiful and complex, showing how the entire galaxy worked together. But something was wrong. Hyun stared at the map and frowned. There was a section that just ended. In one corner of the galaxy, all the stars, all the trade routes, all the markings just stopped. It was like someone had taken scissors and cut that part of the map away. In its place was only darkness with a simple label that read, Human Space. At first, Hyun thought it might be a technical problem. Maybe the display was broken in that area. But as he looked closer, he realized this was intentional. The border was too clean, too perfect to be an accident. Someone had deliberately left this part of the galaxy off the map. Hyun raised his hand to speak. The chamber grew quiet as all eyes turned to him. Elder Counselor Day, a tall being with pale blue skin, nodded for him to continue. "I have a question about the navigation charts," Hyun said. His voice echoed in the large room. "There seems to be an area that is not mapped. The section labeled Human Space. Why is this region not included in our galactic charts?" The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the respectful quiet of beings listening to a speaker. It was the heavy silence of fear. Hyun looked around the room and saw that many of the counselors had gone very still. Some were staring at him with wide eyes. Others were looking down at their desks as if they wished they could disappear. Counselor Nari from the Crystalline Federation began to shake. Her crystal body made small ringing sounds as she trembled. The sound filled the quiet room like broken glass falling on stone. "Perhaps," said Elder Counselor Day slowly, "the new ambassador would benefit from understanding that some questions are better left unasked." But Hyun did not understand the warning in Day's voice. He had been taught that the council was a place of learning and sharing knowledge. He thought his question was reasonable. "With respect, Elder Counselor," Hyun continued, "I cannot properly represent my people if I do not understand our galactic neighbors. Surely there is information about this human space that would help us avoid any problems." More beings in the chamber began to look uncomfortable. Some whispered to each other, in languages Hyun did not know. The whispers had an urgent sound to them, like warnings being passed from one person to another. Jin, the ancient keeper of records, slowly stood up. He was older than anyone else in the chamber, and his movements were careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but somehow reached every corner of the room. "Young ambassador," Jin said, There are boundaries in this galaxy that exist for the protection of those who respect them. The maps end at human space, because that is where our knowledge safely ends as well. Hyun felt frustrated. He had come here expecting clear answers and open discussion. Instead, he was getting riddles and warnings that made no sense. But surely, Hyun pressed on, we must have some diplomatic contact with this human species. Trade agreements? Peace treaties? How can we simply ignore an entire section of the galaxy? The reaction to his words was immediate and frightening. Several counselors stood up quickly and began moving toward the exits. Others covered their faces with their hands, or whatever they used for hands. The crystal being named Nari made a sound, like wind chimes in a storm. Elder Counselor Day raised one hand, and the room became quiet again. But it was not a comfortable quiet. It was the silence of beings who had heard something they wished they could forget. This session is ended, Day announced. All counselors are dismissed. The chamber emptied quickly. Beings who had been sitting calmly just minutes before now hurried toward the doors as if they were escaping from something dangerous. Hyun sat alone in his seat, confused and worried. As the last of the counselors left, Jin approached Hyun's desk. The old keeper moved slowly, and his face showed a sadness that seemed to come from deep inside him. Ambassador Hyun, Jin said quietly, you are new to our ways, so I will give you one piece of advice. In this galaxy, there are some doors that should never be opened, some questions that should never be asked. The matter of human space is both of those things. But why? Hyun asked. What could be so dangerous about asking simple questions? Jin looked at him for a long moment. In his ancient eyes, Hyun saw something that made him feel cold inside. It was not anger or disappointment. It was fear mixed with a deep, old sadness. Because, Jin said slowly, the last beings who asked those questions never came back the same. And the few who did come back, well, they wish they had not. With those words, Jin turned and walked away, leaving Hyun alone in the empty chamber. Over the next few days, Hyun noticed that other counselors avoided him. When he walked into a room, conversations would stop. When he tried to sit with others, during meals, they would find reasons to leave. It was as if his simple question had marked him as dangerous. Hyun tried to approach different counselors privately, hoping to get answers. But each time he mentioned human space, the reaction was the same. Fear, discomfort, and always the same advice. Stop asking questions. But Hyun could not stop. The mystery grew larger in his mind each day. What could be so terrible about humans? That an entire galaxy of advanced civilizations was afraid to even talk about them? What had happened to make beings who traveled between stars and commanded vast technologies act like children afraid of the dark? He began to realize that his innocent question had opened something that was meant to stay closed. But now that it was open, he could not close it again. The need to know the truth burned inside him like a fire. Hyun made a decision. If the council would not give him answers, he would find them himself. Somewhere in this galaxy, there had to be someone who knew the truth about human space. Someone who would tell him why the maps ended there and why everyone was so afraid to ask why. He did not know that his search for answers would take him to places darker than he could imagine. He did not know that some truths are kept hidden not out of cruelty, but out of kindness. And he certainly did not know that by the time he found the answers he was looking for, he would understand why. Everyone else had been too wise to ask the questions. 3 weeks had passed since Hyun asked his question in the council chamber. 3 weeks of being avoided, whispered about, and treated like he carried some kind of disease. He was growing desperate for answers when a message arrived on his personal communication device. The message was short and unsigned. Cantina on level 7 of Station Koros. Come alone. Ask for the back room. Hyun knew he should be careful. Anonymous messages were dangerous in galactic politics, but his need for answers was stronger than his fear. He took a transport ship to Station Koros, a trading post that sat in neutral space between several star systems. The cantina was dark and filled with smoke from a dozen different worlds. Beings of all kinds sat at small tables, talking in quiet voices. The air smelled of spices and chemicals that Hyun did not recognize. He walked to the bar and asked about the back room. The bartender, a short being with too many arms, pointed toward a door without saying a word. Hyun walked through the door and found himself in a smaller room with only one table. A figure sat in the shadows. "You must be the ambassador who asked the wrong questions," said a voice from the darkness. As Hyun's eyes got used to the dim light, he could see the speaker more clearly. It was a being he had never seen before, tall and thin with skin that seemed to change color slowly like oil on water. "I am Minho," the being said. "I buy and sell information. People call me when they need to know things that are not supposed to be known." "Can you tell me about human space?" Hyun asked directly. Minho laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Straight to the point. I like that. Yes, I can tell you about human space, but first you need to understand that this information will cost you more than money. Once you know these things, you cannot unknown them." Hyun nodded. "I understand." "No," Minho said. "You do not. But you will." Minho reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. A soft humming filled the room. "Privacy shield," Minho explained. "What we say now cannot be heard by anyone else." He leaned forward and his voice became very serious. 300 years ago, first contact with humans seemed like the best thing that had ever happened to the galaxy. They were young, excited, and eager to learn. The council welcomed them with open arms. Minho paused and took a drink from a glass that seemed to glow from the inside. The humans appeared to be just another species, reaching out to join the galactic community. They had basic space travel, simple weapons, and normal biology. Nothing special, nothing threatening. The council offered them the usual things: trade, agreements, technology sharing, cultural exchange programs. "What went wrong?" Hyun asked. "That," Minho said, "is a question that has many answers and none of them are good." He touched the device on the table, and it projected a small hologram. The image showed a beautiful blue and green planet surrounded by simple space stations. This was Earth, the human homeworld, 300 years ago. As you can see, it was normal, a nice planet with a young civilization that was just learning to travel between stars. The image changed to show the same planet 50 years later. Hyun gasped. The planet looked completely different. Strange structures floated in space around it. The surface seemed to glow with unnatural light, and the space stations had been replaced with things that hurt to look at, as if they existed in too many dimensions at once. "This is what Earth looked like 50 years after first contact," Minho continued. "And this change happened gradually, so gradually that no one noticed it at first." "What caused the change?" Hyun asked. "Contact with the rest of the galaxy," Minho said simply. The humans learned, and when humans learn, they do not just add new knowledge to what they already know. They change everything they are to fit the new knowledge. Minho touched the device again. This time, the hologram showed what looked like a normal trade meeting between humans and other galactic species. At first, everyone was happy. The humans were enthusiastic trading partners. They bought our technology and sold us their art and culture. They seemed to love everything about galactic civilization. The image changed to show the same meeting a year later. Hyun could see that something was different about the humans, but he could not say exactly what. Then people began to notice small things. Human traders who could hold their breath longer than should be possible. Human diplomats who seemed to know what you were going to say before you said it. Human engineers who could fix machines they had never seen before. That does not sound so terrible, Hyun said. Minho gave him a look that was full of pity. You still do not understand. It was not just humans who were changing. Everyone who spent time around humans began to change too. The hologram now showed a group of different species. They all looked normal at first glance, but as Hyun watched, he began to see that something was wrong with them. They moved in ways that were too smooth, too perfect. Species who had been the same for millions of years began to evolve in real time, not over generations, but over months. Beings who had never been able to survive in hard vacuum suddenly found they could breathe in space. Civilizations that had struggled with basic problems for centuries suddenly began finding impossible solutions. Hyun felt a chill run through his body. Are you saying that humans were somehow making other species evolve? I am saying that humans do not just adapt to their environment, Minho replied. They make their environment adapt to them, and anything that spends enough time in a human environment begins to adapt the same way. Minho reached into his coat again and pulled out another device. This one looked older and was covered in warning labels in languages Hyun could not read. I have a contact in the historical archives. Her name is Yuna, and she has been digging through classified records for years. What she has found will give you nightmares. The device projected a document that was mostly covered in black bars where information had been removed. But Hyun could see enough to make him uncomfortable. This is a report from the Galactic Science Council from 250 years ago. It is titled, Biological and Psychological Changes in Species Exposed to Prolonged Human Contact. Most of it has been classified beyond our ability to read, but you can see the conclusions. Hyun read the visible parts of the document. Words, like unprecedented adaptive rates and fundamental alteration of evolutionary patterns, jumped out at him. But the phrase that made his blood run cold was at the bottom of the page. Recommend immediate implementation of containment protocol, Omega. What is containment protocol Omega? Hyun asked. The policy that created the borders around human space, Minho answered. The policy that made it illegal for any galactic citizen to enter human territory. The policy that removed humans from all galactic maps and made it forbidden to even talk about them. Minho turned off the device and put it away. The room seemed darker without the glow of the hologram. The records that Yuna found all say the same thing. Contact with humans was changing the galaxy in ways that could not be controlled or predicted. Some of the changes seemed good at first. Diseases were being cured. Old conflicts were being resolved. Technologies that had been considered impossible were suddenly being built. That sounds wonderful, Hyun said. It was wonderful, Minho agreed. until people realized that these changes were not stopping. They were accelerating. Every generation of contact made the changes happen faster and in more dramatic ways. The galaxy was becoming something new, something that had never existed before. Minho stood up and walked to the small window in the room. Outside, Hyun could see the stars and the ships moving between them. The council faced a choice, Minho continued. They could let the changes continue and see what the galaxy would become, or they could cut off all contact with humans and try to preserve what they already were. They chose to cut off contact, Hyun said. Yes, and the most frightening part of the whole thing was that the humans agreed to it. When the council came to them and explained the problem, the humans understood immediately. They agreed to isolate themselves to protect the rest of the galaxy from their influence. Minho turned back to face Hyun. In the dim light, his color changing, skin looked almost black. That was 300 years ago. Since then, no one has had official contact with human space. The borders are monitored from a distance, but no one goes in and nothing comes out. Nothing comes out? Hyun asked. Well, Minho said with a smile that had no warmth in it. Almost nothing. After his meeting with Minho, Hyun could not sleep. The information he had learned made him feel sick and excited at the same time. He knew he should stop asking questions, but the mystery had become like a poison in his mind. He had to know more. Minho had mentioned that almost nothing came out of human space. The word almost stuck in Hyun's thoughts. If almost nothing came out, that meant something had come out. Or someone. Hyun spent days searching through old records and passenger lists. He looked for any being who had traveled to human space and returned. Most of the records from that time had been destroyed or classified, but he found small pieces of information. A name here, a travel permit there, a medical record that mentioned deep space trauma. One name appeared more often than others. Tay, a Nexarian trader who had been listed on several exploration missions to newly contacted worlds. The last record Hyun could find showed Tay returning from human space just before the borders were closed. After that, nothing. But if Tay was still alive, where would he be? Hyun hired a private investigator, a sneaky little being named Ko, who specialized in finding people who did not want to be found. It took Ko 3 weeks, but he finally found a lead. Your Ty is alive, Ko reported. But he is not easy to reach. He lives on a moon called Forgotten Rock in the outer void. No regular transports go there. No communication networks reach it. If you want to talk to him, you will have to charter a private ship and go yourself. Hyun did exactly that. The journey took 5 days through some of the emptiest space in the galaxy. Forgotten Rock was well named. It was a small gray moon orbiting a dead star. The only sign of life was a single building made from old shipping containers. When Hyun knocked on the door, it was answered by a being he almost did not recognize as Nexarian. Tay had been a proud, strong species known for their tall builds and bright skin. The being who opened the door was bent over, thin, and had skin that looked like old paper. Go away, Tay said immediately. I do not talk to anyone. I do not want visitors. Please, Hyun said. I just want to ask you about human space. The effect of those words was immediate and terrible. Tay began to shake so hard that he could barely stand. His eyes became wide with fear, and he made a sound like a wounded animal. No, Tay whispered. No, no, no. Do not say those words. Do not think those thoughts. They might hear you. Who might hear me? Hyun asked. But Tae had already begun backing away into his house. Hyun followed him inside, and what he saw made him feel sad and afraid at the same time. The house was small and dark. The walls were covered with papers that had strange symbols and numbers written on them. Some of the papers had burn marks, as if someone had tried to destroy them but could not finish the job. In one corner of the room sat another being, completely still and staring at nothing. "That is Sue," Tae said when he saw Hyun looking. "She was my partner on the expedition. She has not spoken or moved voluntarily in 300 years. The doctors say there is nothing wrong with her body, but her mind went somewhere else and never came back." Hyun looked at Sue more closely. She was breathing and her eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. It was like looking at an empty house. "What happened to her?" Hyun asked. Tae laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who had broken a long time ago. "The same thing that happened to all of us who went there. We saw what humans really are." Tae sat down in a chair that was old and worn. He looked at his old hands as if he had never seen them before. "You want to know about human space? I will tell you, but you will not believe me, and after I tell you, you will wish you had never asked." Hyun sat down across from Tae and waited. "We thought we were going to visit a colony world," Tae began. "The humans had just established a settlement on a planet they called New Sol. It was supposed to be a peaceful trading mission. We brought gifts and samples of our technology. We expected to find a normal developing civilization." Tae stopped talking and stared at the wall for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet that Hyun had to lean forward to hear him. The planet looked normal from orbit, green and blue with white clouds. We could see cities and roads and what looked like normal buildings. Our sensors showed normal atmosphere, normal gravity, normal everything. "What was wrong with it?" Hyun asked. "Nothing was wrong with it," Tae said. "That was the problem. It was too normal, too perfect, like someone had built it from a picture in a book about how planets should look." Tae got up and walked to one of the papers on the wall. It showed a rough drawing of a city, but the lines were shaky, and some parts had been erased and redrawn many times. When we landed, the humans greeted us. They were friendly and excited to meet us. They gave us tours of their city and showed us their technology. Everything seemed wonderful. "But," Hyun prompted. "But I am a trader," Tae continued. "I know how to see things that others miss, and I began to notice that things did not add up. The humans showed us machines that produced more energy than they consumed. They had gardens that grew food faster than plants should be able to grow. They had buildings that were bigger on the inside than on the outside." Hyun felt a cold feeling in his stomach. "That is impossible." "Yes," Tae agreed. "It should be impossible, but the humans did not seem to think so. When I asked them how their machines worked, they would give me answers that made no scientific sense. When I pointed out that their plants were growing too fast, they would just smile and say that life finds a way." Tae walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. "At first, I thought they were lying to us or playing some kind of joke. But then I realized something much worse. They were not lying. They really did not understand that what they were doing was impossible." "What do you mean?" Hyun asked. "Humans do not just adapt to their environment," Tae explained. "They remake reality itself to match what they need, and they do it so naturally, so automatically, that they do not even realize they are doing it." Tae pointed to another paper on the wall. This one showed what looked like a mathematical equation, but the symbols hurt to look at. I tried to study their technology. I tried to understand how their impossible machines worked. The more I learned, the more frightened I became. Human technology does not follow the laws of physics. It follows the laws of what humans believe should be possible. That cannot be true, Hyun said. Cannot it? Tae asked. How do you think humans went from basic space flight to colonizing other worlds in just 50 years? How do you think they built a civilization that can survive completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy? Tae stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the dead star cast no light, and the view was nothing but empty black space. On our last day on New Seoul, one of the human children showed me something that broke my mind, Tae continued. She picked up a rock and told me it was going to become a bird. Then she threw it into the air, and it started flying. Rocks cannot fly, Hyun said automatically. No, Tae agreed. Rocks cannot fly. But this one did, because a human child believed it should. The rock had not become a bird, it was still a rock, but it was flying anyway because reality around humans changes to match what they expect. Tae turned back to face Hyun. His eyes were filled with an old terror that had never gone away. That is when I understood what the Council was really afraid of. Humans do not just change themselves. They change the fundamental rules of how the universe works. And if they spent enough time around other species, those species would start changing the rules too. Is that what happened to Sue? Hyun asked, looking at the still figure in the corner. Sue tried to understand human mathematics, Tae said. She was always good with numbers and equations, but human mathematics describes a universe that works differently from ours. The more she studied it, the more her mind tried to make sense of it. And eventually her mind broke trying to hold two different versions of reality at the same time. Hyun looked at Sue again. She was still staring at nothing, but now he thought he could see something terrible in her empty eyes. She was not looking at nothing. She was looking at something that should not exist. We left the next day, Tae finished. The humans were sad to see us go. But they understood. They knew what they were doing to us, even if they could not control it. When we got back to Council Space, we tried to report what we had seen, but no one believed us. They thought we had gone insane from deep space travel. But you had proof, Hyun said. You had recordings, data, evidence. Tae laughed his broken laugh again. Our equipment recorded exactly what our instruments expected to record. Normal physics, normal biology, normal everything. The impossible things we saw only existed while we were there to see them. Human reality only affects beings with minds complex enough to understand what they are seeing. Tae walked back to his chair and sat down. He looked very tired, as if telling this story had used up all his energy. That is why the borders exist, Ambassador. Not to keep us out of human space, but to keep human space from spreading into our reality. Humans cannot help what they are, but as long as they stay in their own area of the galaxy, the rest of us can continue to live in a universe that makes sense. Hyun sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what he had heard. Finally, he asked the question that was burning in his mind. If all of this is true, why did you agree to tell me? After meeting with Tae, Hyun knew he needed proof. Stories and memories could be dismissed as madness or lies, but hard scientific data could not be argued with. He needed to see human space with his own eyes, even if it was only through instruments. The problem was that all official attempts to observe human space were forbidden. The Galactic Council had strict rules about pointing any sensors toward human territory, but Hyun had an idea. He remembered meeting Kang during his first week at the Council. Kang was a technician who worked at the Galactic Deep Space Observatory, a massive station that studied distant stars and galaxies. Kang was young and curious, and he had seemed interested in Hyun's questions about unexplored regions. Hyun contacted Kang and arranged to meet him at a small restaurant near the observatory. Kang arrived looking nervous and excited at the same time. "I heard about what happened at the council meeting," Kang said as soon as he sat down. "Is it true that you asked about human space?" "Yes," Hyun replied. "And I think you might be able to help me get some answers." Kang leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. "What do you need?" "I need to use the observatory to take a look." "At human space," Hyun said directly. Kang's expression changed immediately. The excitement faded from his face and was replaced by worry. "That is against regulations," Kang said quietly. "We are specifically forbidden from pointing our instruments in that direction. If we were caught, both of us would be in serious trouble." "I know," Hyun said. "But do you know why those regulations exist?" Kang shook his head. "No one has ever explained it to me. I just know that human space is off limits." Hyun spent the next hour telling Kang everything he had learned from Minho and Tai. As he spoke, he watched Kang's expression change from disbelief to fascination to fear. "If what you are saying is true," Kang said slowly, "then this is the most important scientific discovery in galactic history. We have to investigate." "Are you willing to help me?" Hyun asked. Kang was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, but we have to be very careful. And we can only do this when I am working the night shift alone." 3 days later, Hyun arrived at the observatory in the middle of the night. The station was huge, with sensor arrays that stretched out in all directions like metal flowers reaching toward the stars. Kang met him at a side entrance and led him through quiet corridors to the main control room. The control room was filled with screens and displays showing data from across the galaxy. Stars appeared as points of light, planets as small dots, and galaxies as spiral patterns of color. It was beautiful and overwhelming at the same time. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Kang asked one more time. "Yes," Hyun said without hesitation. Kang sat down at the main control station and began typing commands. "I am going to start with passive scans, just pointing our sensors in that direction and seeing what they pick up. If we see anything unusual, we can decide whether to go deeper." The main display screen changed to show a star map of the local galactic region. Kang highlighted the area where human space should be and began adjusting the instruments. "Initiating scan," Kang said. "This will take a few minutes to process." They waited in tense silence as the observatory's powerful sensors gathered data. Hyun could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet room. Finally, the results began to appear on the screen. At first, everything looked normal. Stars appeared where they should be. Planets orbited those stars in predictable patterns. It was exactly what they would expect to see in any other part of the galaxy. "Well," Kang said, sounding a little disappointed, "this looks perfectly ordinary. Maybe all those stories were just—" He stopped talking suddenly. One of the smaller displays had begun flashing with warning symbols. "What is that?" Hyun asked. Kang leaned forward and began reading the data. His face went pale. "This cannot be right. According to these readings, some of the stars in that region are burning with impossible colors." "What do you mean, impossible? Colors?" "I mean colors that do not exist," Kang explained. "Light frequencies that are not part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our instruments are detecting photons that should not be able to exist." More warnings began appearing on other displays. Kang moved quickly from screen to screen, reading each new set of data with growing amazement and fear. "This is incredible," he whispered. "Look at this planetary orbit pattern. This planet is orbiting its star in a figure 8. That violates every law of gravity we know." Hyun looked at the display Kang was pointing to. The orbital pattern did indeed look like a figure 8, with the planet somehow managing to loop around its star twice in each orbit without being torn apart by gravitational forces. "And look at this," Kang continued, pointing to another screen. "This structure cannot possibly exist." The display showed what looked like a space station, but it was wrong in ways that hurt to think about. The structure appeared to be built from crystallized space itself, with walls that curved in directions that should not exist, and rooms that were somehow larger than the buildings that contained them. "We need to get Chief Scientist Bora," Kang said. "She needs to see this data." "Will she help us?" Hyun asked. "If these readings are real, she will have to help us," Kang replied. "This data challenges everything we think we know about physics." Kang contacted Bora on her private communication device. It took several minutes of urgent whispering to convince her to come to the observatory at such a late hour, but eventually she agreed. Bora arrived 20 minutes later, looking tired and annoyed. She was a senior scientist with gray hair and sharp eyes who had spent most of her life studying the basic laws that govern the universe. "This better be important," she said as she walked into the control room. "I was in the middle of—" She stopped talking when she saw the displays. For a long moment, she just stared at the data, her mouth slightly open. "What am I looking at?" she asked quietly. "Sensor readings from human space," Kang replied. Bora's reaction was immediate. She spun around to face them with an expression of horror and anger. "Are you insane?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you have done? Scanning human space is forbidden for very good reasons." "What reasons?" Hyun asked. "Everyone keeps telling me it is forbidden, but no one will explain. Why?" Bora looked at him as if he were a child who had just lit his house on fire. "Because human space exists in a fundamentally different reality from ours. Pointing our sensors at it creates a connection between their reality and ours, and that connection works both ways." Even as she spoke, new alarms began sounding throughout. The control room. Red warning lights flashed, and automated voices began announcing emergency conditions. "What is happening?" Hyun asked. Bora was moving quickly between different control stations, reading data and making adjustments. "Our scan has been detected. Something in human space is scanning us back." The main display screen flickered and went dark for a moment. When it came back on, it showed something that made all three of them step backward in fear. The screen displayed a message in perfect galactic standard language. "Please do not look. It is for your own safety. Humanity." But that was not the frightening part. The frightening part was that the message was appearing on every display in the observatory, and according to the communication logs, it was also appearing on every screen, every communication device, and every computer terminal in the entire galaxy. "How is this possible?" Kang whispered. "Humans do not follow our rules for how information and communication work," Bora explained. "When they want to send a message, they just send it. Distance and communication networks do not matter to them." The message stayed on the screens for exactly 1 minute, then disappeared. The observatory systems returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But the three of them knew that everything had changed. "We need to shut down this scan immediately," Bora said, "and we need to destroy all the data we collected. But this is the greatest scientific discovery in history," Kang protested. "We cannot just throw it away." "Watch me," Bora replied, and began typing commands to delete the scanned data. But before she could finish, the screens flickered again. This time, instead of a message, they showed an image. It was a picture of a human city, but it was wrong in the same way that everything else in human space was wrong. The buildings seemed to exist in too many dimensions. The sky was filled with colors that had no names, and in the center of the image was a group of humans waving at the camera. They looked completely normal. They looked friendly and happy, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. The image faded after a few seconds, and the screens returned to normal. But Hyun knew that he would never forget what he had seen. In that brief glimpse of human space, he had seen a reality where the impossible was ordinary, and the laws of physics were more like suggestions. "Now do you understand?" Bora asked quietly. "Now do you see why we do not look?" The next morning, the observatory was quietly shut down for routine maintenance. The official records showed no unusual activity from the previous night, and Kang received a transfer to a research station on the far side of the galaxy. But Hyun had gotten what he came for. He had proof that human space was real, and that it was everything the stories said it was. The only question now was what he was going to do with that knowledge. The answer came to him as he was leaving the observatory. He was going to find someone. Word traveled fast in the small circles of galactic intelligence. Within a week of the observatory incident, Hyun received another anonymous message. This one was different from the others. It came through official council communication channels, which meant someone with high security clearance had sent it. The message was simple. Garden-level restaurant, council station. Table 7. Come alone. Ask no questions of the staff. Hyun arrived at the specified time and found table 7 in a quiet corner of the restaurant. A figure in a dark hood was already waiting for him. As he approached, the figure looked up, and Hyun saw the face of someone he recognized from council briefings. Ray had been a military strategist for the Galactic Council for over 200 years. She was known for her brilliant tactical mind and her ability to see threats that others missed. What she was not known for was meeting with junior ambassadors in secret. "Sit down quickly," Ray said in a low voice. "We do not have much time before my absence is noticed." Hyun sat down across from her. "Why did you want to meet with me?" "Because you are asking questions about human space, and those questions are going to get you killed if you are not careful," Ray replied. "But more importantly, because you deserve to know the truth about what you are dealing with." Ray reached into her coat and pulled out a data storage device. It was small and old, and it had the kind of security seals that were used for the most classified military information. "This contains the strategic assessment that led to the creation of the containment protocols," she said. "I was part of the team that wrote it. I was also part of the team that recommended cutting off all contact with humanity." "What did you find?" Hyun asked. Ray activated the device, and a small holographic display appeared above the table. It showed what looked like a military report with charts and graphs. 300 years ago, the Council decided to evaluate humanity's military capabilities, Ray began. It was standard procedure for new species joining the galactic community. We needed to know if they could contribute to our defense networks, and if they posed any potential threats. The hologram showed a series of weapons tests and tactical exercises. Everything looked normal at first glance. The initial assessment was routine, Ray continued. Humans had basic projectile weapons, simple explosives, and standard defensive systems. Nothing impressive, but nothing concerning either. The display changed to show what appeared to be a combat simulation. Then we decided to run some practical exercises. We wanted to see how human military units would perform against various galactic threats. We set up training scenarios using holographic enemies and simulated battle conditions. What happened? Hyun asked. Ray's expression darkened. The humans won, every single scenario, every single time. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how they won. The hologram now showed footage from one of the training exercises. Hyun watched as human soldiers moved through what appeared to be a standard urban warfare scenario. At first, everything looked normal. Then he began to notice things that made no sense. "Watch this soldier here," Ray said, pointing to one of the figures in the simulation. She is supposed to be a normal human infantry unit with standard equipment. Hyun watched the soldier Ray had indicated. The woman was moving through a building that was under heavy enemy fire. But instead of taking cover or finding alternate routes, she was walking straight through walls. "How is she doing that?" Hyun asked. "We asked the same question," Ray replied. "When we reviewed the exercise with the human commanders, they looked at the footage and said, 'Oh, that. Jin learned to phase shift last week. It is a useful battlefield technique.'" The display changed to show another soldier who appeared to be moving faster than the recording equipment could follow. He would appear in one location, then instantly appear somewhere else entirely. This one told us he had figured out how to fold space to cover long distances quickly, Ray explained. He said it was no different from learning to run or jump, just in more dimensions. Hyun felt a familiar chill running down his spine. These are not normal military capabilities. No, Ray agreed. They are not. But the humans acted as if they were perfectly natural. When we asked them to explain their techniques, they would give us instruction manuals that described impossible things as if they were basic training exercises. The hologram now showed a group of human soldiers working together to move what appeared to be a mountain. This unit was tasked with clearing a path through difficult terrain, Ray said. Instead of using explosives or heavy equipment, they convinced the mountain to move itself. "That is impossible," Hyun said automatically. "Yes, it should be impossible," Ray replied. But the humans did not seem to think so. When we asked them how they had done it, they said they had simply asked the mountain nicely and explained why it needed to move. The display changed again, this time showing what looked like a space battle. Human ships were fighting against simulated enemy vessels, but the physics of the engagement made no sense. In this exercise, the human fleet was outnumbered 10-1, Ray explained. They should have been destroyed within minutes. Instead, they won by convincing the enemy ships to switch sides. "Convincing them how?" Hyun asked. "The human admiral sent a message to the enemy fleet explaining why fighting was unnecessary and suggesting that they work together instead," Ray said. The enemy ships, which were computer simulations programmed to be hostile, agreed with her logic and joined the human fleet. Hyun stared at the hologram in disbelief. Computer simulations cannot be convinced to change their programming. "No," Ray said, "they cannot. But somehow, the humans did it anyway." She turned off the device, and the hologram disappeared. The restaurant seemed very quiet without the sound of the simulated battles. The more exercises we ran, the more disturbed we became, Ray continued. Human warfare did not follow any known principles of military science. They did not fight with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They fought by making war itself evolve to suit their needs. Ray leaned forward and spoke even more quietly. "We observed human soldiers who could survive in hard vacuum without spacesuits, infantry units that moved faster than their own vehicles, Strategists who seemed to know what the enemy was going to do before the enemy knew it themselves. How is any of that possible? Hyun asked. Because humans do not accept limitations the way other species do, Ray explained. When they encounter a problem, they do not work around it. They change the fundamental nature of the problem until it is no longer a problem. Ray pulled out another device, this one newer and with even more security seals. This is the final report I submitted to the Council, she said. It contains my official recommendation regarding humanity's military potential. She activated the device, and a short document appeared in the air between them. Most of it was in technical military language, but the conclusion was written in simple, clear words that anyone could understand. After extensive testing and evaluation, it is the opinion of this assessment team that humanity represents a military capability unlike anything previously encountered in galactic history. Their methods of warfare operate on principles that appear to violate known physical laws. More concerning is their apparent ability to adapt and evolve their capabilities in real time during combat situations. Hyun read the final paragraph of the report with growing dread. It is the unanimous recommendation of this team that direct military engagement with humanity be avoided at all costs. Their approach to conflict is not just effective, it is transformative. Any extended military contact with human forces would likely result in fundamental changes to our own military capabilities and strategic thinking. These changes might be beneficial in the short term, but their long-term consequences cannot be predicted or controlled. The report concludes with a single recommendation, Ray said. Maintain distance, indefinitely. Hyun looked up from the document. The Council accepted your recommendation? Yes, Ray replied, but not immediately. There were those who argued that humanity's military capabilities could be useful for galactic defense. They wanted to recruit human forces to help protect against external threats. What changed their minds? Hyun asked. Ray's expression became very serious. We discovered that humans were not just changing their own capabilities. They were changing ours too. She activated the device one more time, and it showed what appeared to be medical scans and psychological evaluations. Every member of my assessment team underwent routine medical and psychological examinations before and after our contact with human military units, Ray explained. The results were disturbing. The scans showed dramatic changes in brain structure and physical capabilities among all the team members. Some had developed new sensory organs. Others showed evidence of enhanced cognitive abilities. All of them displayed biological changes that should have taken millions of years to evolve. We were becoming more like them, Ray said simply. Just from observing their training exercises and studying their techniques, we were beginning to develop similar capabilities. That must have been exciting, Hyun said. It was terrifying, Ray corrected. We were changing in ways we could not control or understand, and the changes were accelerating with each exposure to human methods. Ray turned off the device and word traveled fast in the small circles of galactic intelligence. Within a week of the observatory incident, Hyun received another anonymous message. This one was different from the others. It came through official council communication channels, which meant someone with high security clearance had sent it. The message was simple. Garden-level restaurant, council station. Table 7, come alone. Ask no questions of the staff. Hyun arrived at the specified time and found table 7 in a quiet corner of the restaurant. A figure in a dark hood was already waiting for him. As he approached, the figure looked up, and Hyun saw the face of someone he recognized from council briefings. Ray had been a military strategist for the Galactic Council for over 200 years. She was known for her brilliant tactical mind and her ability to see threats that others missed. What she was not known for was meeting with junior ambassadors in secret. "Sit down quickly," Ray said in a low voice. "We do not have much time before my absence is noticed." Hyun sat down across from her. "Why did you want to meet with me?" "Because you are asking questions about human space, and those questions are going to get you killed if you are not careful," Ray replied. "But more importantly, because you deserve to know the truth about what you are dealing with." Ray reached into her coat and pulled out a data storage device. It was small and old, and it had the kind of security seals that were used for the most classified military information. "This contains the strategic assessment that led to the creation of the containment protocols," she said. "I was part of the team that wrote it. I was also part of the team that recommended cutting off all contact with humanity." "What did you find?" Hyun asked. Ray activated the device, and a small holographic display appeared above the table. It showed what looked like a military report with charts and graphs. 300 years ago, the Council decided to evaluate humanity's military capabilities, Ray began. "It was standard procedure for new species joining the galactic community. We needed to know if they could contribute to our defense networks, and if they posed any potential threats." The hologram showed a series of weapons tests and tactical exercises. Everything looked normal at first glance. "The initial assessment was routine," Ray continued. "Humans had basic projectile weapons, simple explosives, and standard defensive systems. Nothing impressive, but nothing concerning either." The display changed to show what appeared to be a combat simulation. "Then we decided to run some practical exercises. We wanted to see how human military units would perform against various galactic threats. We set up training scenarios using holographic enemies and simulated battle conditions." "What happened?" Hyun asked. Ray's expression darkened. "The humans won, every single scenario, every single time. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how they won." The hologram now showed footage from one of the training exercises. Hyun watched as human soldiers moved through what appeared to be a standard urban warfare scenario. At first, everything looked normal. Then he began to notice things that made no sense. "Watch this soldier here," Ray said, pointing to one of the figures in the simulation. "She is supposed to be a normal human infantry unit with standard equipment." Hyun watched the soldier Ray had indicated. The woman was moving through a building that was under heavy enemy fire. But instead of taking cover or finding alternate routes, she was walking straight through walls. "How is she doing that?" Hyun asked. "We asked the same question," Ray replied. "When we reviewed the exercise with the human commanders, they looked at the footage and said, 'Oh, that. Jin learned to phase shift last week. It is a useful battlefield technique.'" The display changed to show another soldier who appeared to be moving faster than the recording equipment could follow. He would appear in one location, then instantly appear somewhere else entirely. "This one told us he had figured out how to fold space to cover long distances quickly," Ray explained. "He said it was no different from learning to run or jump, just in more dimensions." Hyun felt a familiar chill running down his spine. "These are not normal military capabilities." "No," Ray agreed. "They are not. But the humans acted as if they were perfectly natural. When we asked them to explain their techniques, they would give us instruction manuals that described impossible things as if they were basic training exercises." The hologram now showed a group of human soldiers working together to move what appeared to be a mountain. This unit was tasked with clearing a path through difficult terrain. Ray said. Instead of using explosives or heavy equipment, they convinced the mountain to move itself. That is impossible, Hyun said automatically. Yes, it should be impossible, Ray replied, but the humans did not seem to think so. When we asked them how they had done it, they said they had simply asked the mountain nicely and explained why it needed to move. The display changed again, this time showing what looked like a space battle. Human ships were fighting against simulated enemy vessels, but the physics of the engagement made no sense. In this exercise, the human fleet was outnumbered 10-1, Ray explained. They should have been destroyed within minutes. Instead, they won by convincing the enemy ships to switch sides. Convincing them how? Hyun asked. The human admiral sent a message to the enemy fleet explaining why fighting was unnecessary and suggesting that they work together instead, Ray said. The enemy ships, which were computer simulations programmed to be hostile, agreed with her logic and joined the human fleet. Hyun stared at the hologram in disbelief. Computer simulations cannot be convinced to change their programming. No, Ray said, they cannot. But somehow, the humans did it anyway. She turned off the device and the hologram disappeared. The restaurant seemed very quiet without the sound of the simulated battles. The more exercises we ran, the more disturbed we became, Ray continued. Human warfare did not follow any known principles of military science. They did not fight with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They fought by making war itself evolve to suit their needs. Ray leaned forward and spoke even more quietly. We observed human soldiers who could survive in hard vacuum without spacesuits, infantry units that moved faster than their own vehicles, strategists who seemed to know what the enemy was going to do before the enemy knew it themselves. How is any of that possible? Hyun asked. Because humans do not accept limitations the way other species do, Ray explained. When they encounter a problem, they do not work around it. They change the fundamental nature of the problem until it is no longer a problem. Ray pulled out another device, this one newer and with even more security seals. This is the final report I submitted to the Council, she said. It contains my official recommendation regarding humanity's military potential. She activated the device, and a short document appeared in the air between them. Most of it was in technical military language, but the conclusion was written in simple, clear words that anyone could understand. After extensive testing and evaluation, it is the opinion of this assessment team that humanity represents a military capability unlike anything previously encountered in galactic history. Their methods of warfare operate on principles that appear to violate known physical laws. More concerning is their apparent ability to adapt and evolve their capabilities in real time during combat situations. Hyun read the final paragraph of the report with growing dread. It is the unanimous recommendation of this team that direct military engagement with humanity be avoided at all costs. Their approach to conflict is not just effective, it is transformative. Any extended military contact with human forces would likely result in fundamental changes to our own military capabilities and strategic thinking. These changes might be beneficial in the short term, but their long-term consequences cannot be predicted or controlled. The report concludes with a single recommendation, Ray said. Maintain distance, indefinitely. Hyun looked up from the document. The Council accepted your recommendation? Yes, Ray replied, but not immediately. There were those who argued that humanity's military capabilities could be useful for galactic defense. They wanted to recruit human forces to help protect against external threats. What changed their minds? Hyun asked. Ray's expression became very serious. We discovered that humans were not just changing their own capabilities. They were changing ours, too. She activated the device one more time, and it showed what appeared to be medical scans and psychological evaluations. Every member of my assessment team underwent routine medical and psychological examinations before and after our contact with human military units, Ray explained. The results were disturbing. The scans showed dramatic changes in brain structure and physical capabilities among all the team members. Some had developed new sensory organs. Others showed evidence of enhanced cognitive abilities. All of them displayed biological changes that should have taken millions of years to evolve. We were becoming more like them, Ray said simply. Just from observing their training exercises and studying their techniques, we were beginning to develop similar capabilities. That must have been exciting, Hyun said. It was terrifying, Ray corrected. We were changing in ways we could not control or understand, and the changes were accelerating with each exposure to human methods. Ray turned off the device and After learning about the economic anomalies, Hyun felt like he was carrying a weight that grew heavier each day. Every new piece of information about human space made the mystery more complex and more frightening. He had gathered evidence from traders, soldiers, scientists, and economists, but he still felt like he was missing the most important part of the story. He needed to find someone who had been there from the beginning, someone who had witnessed first contact with humans and could explain how the galaxy had gone from welcoming them to isolating them completely. That search led him to Sol was mentioned in historical records as one of the oldest beings in galactic civilization. The record said Sul had been present for every major event in galactic history for over 1,000 years. If anyone knew the complete truth about human space, it would be Sol. Finding Sol was not easy. The ancient being lived on a space station that drifted in the empty regions between star systems. The station was old and small, more like a hermit's retreat than a proper residence. Hyun had to charter a special ship just to reach it. When he finally arrived at Sol's station, he was surprised by how simple it was. The docking bay was barely large enough for his small transport, and the corridors inside were narrow and dimly lit. It felt more like visiting a monastery than meeting with one of the galaxy's most ancient inhabitants. Sol met him at the airlock. The ancient being was tall and thin, with skin that looked like old paper and eyes that seemed to hold the memory of centuries. Sol moved slowly, but with a dignity that came from having seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Ambassador. Hyun, Sul said in a voice that was soft but clear. I have been expecting you. You have? Hyun asked. Word travels far, even to forgotten places like this, Sul replied. Your questions about human space have reached even my ears. And I think it is time that someone told you the complete truth. Sul led him through the station to a small room filled with books, artifacts, and holographic displays showing images from across galactic history. It was like walking into a museum of everything that had ever happened in the galaxy. Please sit down, Sul said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. What I am about to tell you will take some time, and you will want to be sitting for all of it. Hyun sat down and waited while Sol moved to a large window that looked out into the empty space between stars. 350 years ago, Sul began. I was present when the first human ship entered galactic space. It was a small vessel, primitive by our standards, carrying only a dozen humans who were exploring beyond their solar system. Sul activated one of the holographic displays, and it showed an image of a simple spacecraft that looked crude compared to modern galactic ships. The humans aboard that ship were excited and nervous. They had dreamed of meeting other intelligent species for their entire lives, and here they were, finally making contact with a galaxy full of civilizations. The image changed to show the first meeting between humans and galactic representatives. The humans looked young and eager, while the galactic delegation appeared formal and confident. "The first meetings went wonderfully," Sewell continued. "The humans were curious about everything. They asked thousands of questions about our technology, our cultures, our history. They were like children who had just discovered that there was a vast universe beyond their backyard." "What went wrong?" Hyun asked. Sewell turned away from the window and looked at him with ancient eyes that seemed infinitely sad. "Nothing went wrong," Sewell said. "That was the problem." Saul activated another display, this one showing what appeared to be a timeline of human contact with galactic civilization. The humans learned quickly, much more quickly than any species we had ever encountered. Within 50 years of first contact, they had mastered technologies that typically took civilizations centuries to develop. Within 100 years, they had surpassed many of our member species in scientific advancement. The timeline showed a steep curve of human technological progress that was far steeper than the progress curves of any other species. But it was not just that they learned quickly, Sewell explained. It was that they changed everything they learned to fit their own way of thinking. Human technology did not work the same way as galactic technology, even when it was based on the same scientific principles. Sewell brought up another display showing side-by-side comparisons of human and galactic technologies. Look at this comparison of faster-than-light travel systems. Our technology uses complex calculations and massive energy expenditures to fold space between 2 points. Human technology achieves the same result by asking space nicely to move aside. Hyun stared at the comparison in disbelief. "Asking space to move aside? That is a simplified explanation," Sewell said. "But it is essentially accurate. Humans developed a form of technology that worked through intention and communication rather than through force and manipulation." Sewell moved to another display that showed biological data. "And then we began to notice that other species were changing too. Beings who spent time around humans began to develop new capabilities. Scientists who studied human technology began to understand concepts that had previously been impossible. Traders who worked with human merchants began to find that their own businesses became more successful in ways they could not explain. The humans were causing other species to evolve," Hyun said. "Yes, but not intentionally," Sewell replied. "Humans do not consciously try to change other species. They simply exist in a way that makes change inevitable for anyone around them." Sewell activated a larger display that filled most of the room. It showed a map of the galaxy from 300 years ago with indicators showing the spread of what the display labeled as adaptive enhancement. "This shows how quickly the changes spread through galactic civilization," Sewell explained. "Within 150 years of first contact, over half of all galactic species showed signs of enhanced adaptive capabilities." Hyun studied the map and felt a chill run through him. The changes had spread much faster and much farther than he had realized. "The effects were beneficial at first," Sewell continued. "Species that had struggled with diseases for millennia suddenly found cures. Civilizations that had been stuck at certain technological levels began making rapid advances. Old conflicts were resolved as different species developed better understanding of each other." "That sounds wonderful," Hyun said. "It was wonderful," Saul agreed. "For a while, but the changes did not stop. They accelerated, and we began to realize that we were becoming something new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. Sol brought up another display, this one showing psychological and cultural analysis data. Species were not just gaining new capabilities, they were losing their original identities, the characteristics that had defined each civilization for millions of years were being replaced by new traits that made them more like humans. Is that necessarily bad? Hyun asked. Sol looked at him with an expression that was both kind and infinitely sad. That is the question that divided the galaxy, Sul said. Some believed that the changes were the next step in galactic evolution. Others believed that we were losing everything that made us who we were. Sul activated one final display. This, one showing meeting records from the Galactic Council from 270 years ago. The debate raged for decades, Sul explained. Half the council wanted to embrace the changes and see where they led. The other half wanted to find ways to stop or reverse them. What ended the debate? Hyun asked. The humans did, Sul said. Simply, he brought up a communication log that showed a message from human representatives to the Galactic Council. The humans had been watching the debate with growing concern. They realized that their presence in galactic civilization was forcing changes that many species did not want. So they made an offer. Sul highlighted the key section of the message, and Hyun read it with growing amazement. We understand that our participation in galactic civilization is causing changes that many of you find disturbing. We do not wish to impose our nature on species that prefer to remain as they are. Therefore, we propose to isolate ourselves within our current territory to prevent further unwanted influence on galactic society. They offered to isolate themselves? Hyun asked. More than that, Sul replied. They insisted on it. When the council tried to negotiate, the humans were firm. They would not allow their presence to force unwanted changes on species that valued their original nature. Sol brought up another document, this one showing the formal agreement that established the boundaries around human space. The isolation was not a punishment or a containment measure, Sul explained. It was an act of compassion. The humans chose to limit themselves to protect the rest of the galaxy from their influence. Hyun sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Everything he had been told, everything he had assumed about human space, had been wrong. So the borders exist to keep humans in, not to keep us out? He asked. No, Sul corrected gently. The borders exist to give both sides a choice. The galaxy can choose to remain as it is, and humans can choose to remain isolated. But the borders also preserve the possibility that someday both sides might choose something different. Sol moved to a different display, this one showing current data about the border regions. The containment is not perfect, Sol continued. Human influence sank. Hyun returned to council space carrying the weight of everything he had learned. The truth about human space was more complex and more profound than anyone had told him. Now he faced the most difficult decision of his life. What to do with that? Truth. For days, he sat in his quarters thinking about everything Sul had revealed. The humans were not prisoners behind their borders. They were volunteers who had chosen isolation to protect the galaxy from unwanted change. But that isolation was never meant to be permanent. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to make a conscious choice about its future. Hyun decided he needed advice from people he trusted. He contacted his two closest advisors, Min, who had helped him prepare for his ambassador role, and Yu, who served as his cultural liaison with other species. They met in Hyun's private office, where he could speak freely without fear of being overheard. "I need to tell you something that will change how you think about the galaxy," Hyun began. "And then I need your help deciding what to do about it." He spent 2 hours explaining everything he had learned. He told them about Tae's terrifying experiences, about the observatory incident, about Ray's military assessment, about Hana's economic analysis, and finally about Seoul's revelation of the complete truth. When he finished, Min and Yu sat in stunned silence. "Are you telling us," Min said slowly, "that the galaxy has been hiding from the greatest opportunity in its history out of fear?" "I am telling you," Hyun replied, "that the galaxy has been preserving its right to choose what it wants to become." "The fear is real, but so is the opportunity." Yu leaned forward in her chair. "But if humans are as powerful as you describe, why should we trust them to keep their isolation voluntary? What stops them from just taking over the galaxy if they want to?" "Because," Hyun said, "they have had 300 years to do exactly that, and they have chosen not to. Their power is not the kind that works through force. It works through inspiration and transformation." Min stood up and began pacing around the room. "This is the most important information in galactic history. The Council needs to know about this immediately." "Does it?" Yu asked. "If this information becomes public, it will cause panic. Some species will demand immediate contact with humans. Others will try to strengthen the isolation. The galaxy could tear itself apart arguing about what to do." Hyun had been thinking about the same problem. "That is why I wanted to talk to both of you first. We need to decide not just whether to reveal this information, but how to reveal it in a way that helps the galaxy make a wise decision." The three of them spent hours discussing options. They could present the information to the Council privately and let the leadership decide. They could release it publicly and trust galactic citizens to make their own choices. They could sit on the information and hope someone else would eventually ask the right questions. They were still debating when Hyun's communication system activated with an urgent message. "Ambassador Hyun," came a voice he did not recognize. "This is Chan, speaking for the human delegation. We would like to request a meeting." Hyun felt his blood turn cold. He looked at Min and Yu, who were staring at the communication device with wide eyes. "How do you know about my investigation?" Hyun asked. "We have been monitoring galactic communication networks for signs that someone was asking questions about our isolation," Chan replied. "Your research has been quite thorough. We think it is time for a direct conversation." "Are you inviting me to human space?" Hyun asked. "No," Chan said. "We are asking permission to come to Council space. For the first time in 300 years, we would like to send a delegation to address the Galactic Council directly." The message ended, leaving the three of them in shocked silence. "They want to come here?" Min whispered. "They want to end the isolation," Yu said. Hyun realized that his investigation had done more than uncover the truth about human space. It had somehow triggered the next phase of galactic history. Within hours, word of the human request had spread. Throughout the Council, emergency sessions were called. Species representatives who had not spoken to each other in decades began having urgent conversations. The galaxy was buzzing with excitement, fear, and confusion. Hyun found himself at the center of it all, as the ambassador who had triggered the human response. He was suddenly the most important person in galactic politics. Everyone wanted to know what he had learned, what the humans had told him, and what he thought the galaxy should do. The Council scheduled a formal debate for the following week. Species representatives would present arguments for and against allowing the human delegation to visit. Then they would vote on whether to accept the humans' request. As the debate approached, Hyun realized that he would have to speak. His investigation had started this process, and the council would expect him to share what he had learned. The night before the debate, Hyun received another message from Chan. Ambassador Hyun, we want you to know that whatever the council decides, we will respect that decision. If the galaxy chooses to maintain the isolation, we will continue to honor those boundaries. But we also want you to know that our offer comes with promises. What kind of promises? Hyun asked. We promise that any contact will be voluntary and gradual. No species will be forced to interact with us if they prefer not to. We promise that we have developed better methods for controlling our influence, so that exposure to human nature will not cause unwanted changes. And we promise that any species that chooses to work with us will be free to end that contact at any time. How can you promise to control something that you described as automatic and unconscious? Hyun asked. Because we have had 300 years to learn about ourselves, Chan replied. We understand our nature better now, and we have developed ways to direct our influence consciously rather than letting it spread unconsciously. What do you want from the galaxy in return? Hyun asked. There was a long pause before Chan answered. We want the chance to share what we have learned, she said finally. We have discovered solutions to problems that have plagued galactic civilization for millennia. We have technologies that could eliminate scarcity, end disease, and allow species to become whatever they choose to be. But most importantly, we have learned how to grow and change without losing the essential nature of what you are. You can preserve identity while enabling transformation? Hyun asked. We can, Chan confirmed. But we cannot prove it to you from behind these borders. We can only demonstrate it through careful, controlled contact with species that choose to take that risk. The conversation ended with Chan's final message. Tomorrow, the galaxy will choose its future. We hope that choice will include us, but we will respect whatever decision you make. The debate the next day was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of species spoke for hours, presenting every argument for and against renewed contact with humanity. Some argued that the potential benefits were too great to ignore. Others insisted that the risks were too dangerous to accept. A few species threatened to leave the council entirely if contact was renewed. Others threatened to leave if it was not. When Hyun's turn came to speak, the chamber fell completely silent. Everyone knew that his investigation had started this process, and they wanted to hear what conclusions he had reached. Hyun stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. He thought about everything he had learned, everyone he had spoken to, and the weight of the decision that lay before them. 3 months ago, he began, I asked a simple question about why our galactic maps end at human space. I thought I was asking about cartography. I was actually asking about the most important choice our civilization has ever faced. He paused and looked around the chamber. I have learned that humans are not our enemies. They are not conquerors or threats to be contained. They are a species that discovered something wonderful and terrible. The ability to transcend the limitations that the rest of us accept as permanent. I have also learned that the isolation of human space was not imposed by us on them. It was chosen by them for us, to preserve our right to remain as we are if that is what we prefer. But isolation was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to give us time to decide what we want to become. That time is ending. The question before us now is not whether humans are safe to contact. The question is whether we are ready to choose our own future consciously. rather than letting it be chosen for us by fear and uncertainty. Hyun looked directly at Elder Counselor Day, who had first warned him against asking questions about human space. Some of you believe that what we are now is valuable enough to preserve unchanged. You may be right. Others believe that what we could become is worth the risk of transformation. You may also be right. But I believe that the choice itself is more important than the outcome. For 300 years, we have let fear make this decision for us. I think it is time for us to make it consciously, with full knowledge of what we are choosing. Hyun returned to his seat, and the chamber buzzed with quiet conversation as representatives considered his words. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected. Some species voted for contact, others voted against it. A few abstained, saying they needed more time to decide. When the counting was finished, the result was announced. By a margin of